The next thing I wanted to ask you about, Noam, is the phenomena of inner speech or lack thereof. Vygotsky has a theory suggesting that the conversations we have with ourselves have the properties of dialogue because it comes from social exchanges. Noam, you introduced the notion of phase, a partial structure that is committed to intermediate memory via inner speech. So I guess I wanted to ask you first, do you experience inner speech? Because I don't.
Well, Vygotsky made an important step forward by saying we should at least pay attention to this. But the fact is, what's called inner speech is outer speech. When you say something to yourself, you can determine whether it rhymes with something else. You can determine how long it is. That's not inner speech. That's external speech in which you haven't activated the articulatory organs. So it's getting nowhere near inner speech. We do have inner speech, but we have to study it from the outside, the way you study the operation of the huge nervous system that controls how the autonomous systems of the body operate. We can't introspect into them. The only thing you know about them is if you have a stomach ache, they're not working. But you can't introspect into how they're working. That's a huge nervous system, very much like the one that's up here. We can't introspect into this one either. We can only see some external parts of it, fragments that come to mind. And if you think seriously about those fragments, you can tell that they're nowhere near what's going on inside. So take any ordinary experience, simple experience. You walk into a restaurant, you see your friend Joe is sitting there. You remember you wanted to talk to him about something, but then you notice that he's talking to Mary, and Mary won't like to hear what you're going to say. So you better not say it. So you think, well, I'll say something else when I go over. All of this happens in a microsecond, a fraction of a microsecond. It's impossible for speech to go that fast, no matter how fast the nervous system just doesn't work like that. Right. And this is a small example. There are much more complex ones. So in fact, if you think about what's called inner speech, it's little bits of fragments of complicated stuff that's going on in your mind. And when you concentrate on the fragments, you can expand them into a full sentence the way I just did. But you don't do that when you're experiencing it. So inner speech is a superficial series of fragments that have something to do with what's going on in your mind. But what's going on in your mind is real inner speech. And that we can study, but we study it the way we study the enteric nervous system, the nervous system that controls the functioning of the body from the outside. And we can learn a lot about it that way, but it's not inner speech.
Mm. So when I speak with people about this, they describe being able to, like, for instance, if they're reading a book, they're hearing the narration in their head as they're reading, like silently to themselves. I have never experienced that. I've never heard words narrated in my mind at all. And I've tried to, meditate and focus on this and try to pick something up. But it's more like if I read this juice container to myself, I am kind of recording the data of, 100% juice. Okay, I read that in my mind. I don't hear any dialogue or words or any kind of narration. I just kind of record the data.
You have no way to introspect into the workings of your mind. Like, give you a simple example. take what are called anaphors, words that don't refer to anything, but have to pick up their reference from something else. So words like each other, for example. The boys like each other. The interpretation of each other depends on the nearest possible antecedent, the boys. So it's the boys like each other. Suppose I say, the boys expect the girls to like each other. And it's the girls who like each other. I'm still picking the closest antecedent. Suppose I say, which girls do the boys expect to like each other? Well, the closest antecedent is the boys, but that's not the one you're using. You're using the girls. Well, there's a reason for that, and we understand it. The reason is that what's going on in your mind is you're forming the expression, which girls do the boys expect the girls to like each other? You don't hear that, but and you don't, it's not in what we call inner speech, but that's what's going on in your mind. And then the anaphor is picking the closest thing. So why don't we say it? Well, we don't say it because of a major computational principle, which is sort of a least effort principle, which is in carrying out an action, do the least work possible. Well, the least work, that's a very general principle. It's a principle of performance generally. And in this case, the way to do the least work possible is not to pronounce the girls. Our minds tell us it's there. So and that's the same is true for the listener. The listener's mind will reconstruct it because of the way, sorry.
No worries.
Because of the way that, see if I can kill this. Okay. That's just the way the mind operates for good reasons. Turns out that it keeps to economy principles. And therefore you don't carry out the articulatory motions or even the internal motions, the internal computation that would guide them, because they're all reconstructible instantly by the way the mind functions. Well, that's a very simple example, but that generalizes. We have no idea from introspection about what's going on in our minds. We can find it out by the kind of study that we use to study everything else in the world, by looking at empirical phenomena, trying to construct the best explanatory theory for them. You have to study the mind the same way. And when you do, you find quite interesting things, but you can't introspect into it.
Interesting.